Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Please put in the chat where you are joining us from. You can also put in your preferred name and pronouns. Thank you so much for showing up today. We know it may be super early or super late for some of you. Welcome, everyone, to the Society of Gender Professionals event. We have with us Lina Birafe and Rebecca and Sinem, who will be in conversation today. I'm Aparna. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm an SGP member and part of the SGP Secretariat. I will provide you a brief introduction about SGP before we give the mic to Sinem and our speakers. SGP's mission is here on the screen for you all to read, but very briefly, SGP, for those of you who are new to SGP, we are an international association of gender practitioners, academics, activists who are committed to gender justice, to a gender just world. And the mission is to promote the development of intersectional gender expertise, to strengthen connections between gender theory and practice and policy, to support member collaboration and network building, to foster production and dissemination of applied gender research, to provide a platform for the exchange of gender information and resources, to advance gender equality in member communities and through coordinated feminist action. So currently, across SGP networks, across SGP channels, we have over, the number is at 40,000 now. We have over 40,000 SGP members, subscribers, and followers across all continents. Over about 114 countries are represented in this, by our members, subscribers, and followers. SGP has 3,000 newsletter subscribers. We have very active LinkedIn channel that we encourage all of you to follow. Maybe you learned about this event from our LinkedIn page. And our newsletter can be subscribed from our website landing page at the bottom. And we'll share some more information in the chat about it. So this is just a list of the countries represented by SGP's registered members. So registered members can access the full system of benefits that SGP has to offer. As a registered member, you provide crucial resources to help us run SGP. We are a completely volunteer-run and network and completely funded by membership dues. And membership dues are flexible. You can donate value of one meal in your local context, and there is no upper limit. Again, I'll put a link in the chat if you want to learn more about what being an SGP member is about. So over to Sinem to introduce our guests for today and to kick us off. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Aparna. So hello all. I hope you can hear me well. And thanks for being here today with us in this exciting book chat event with the two wonderful authors, Lina Birafe and Rebecca O'Keefe. So today we will discuss their very newly published book, Yalla, Feminists, or Uprisings and Resistance. I'd like to take a moment to introduce Lina and Rebecca before we begin our conversation. Rebecca is a feminist activist, author, and researcher with expertise in peace resistance movements and transitional justice. She is currently based in Ireland. And Lena is a global women's rights expert, speaker, and author with decades of experience worldwide. She creates innovative solutions to global women's rights challenges. She worked for over 20 years as a humanitarian aid worker in contexts such as Afghanistan, Haiti, Central African Republic, and others. Lena now works independently and advises organizations and companies in enhancing their engagement with women's rights and gender equality. Okay, so I'm sure Lena and Rebecca will give us a fuller introduction as they discuss the origins of Yalla Feminists and their writing partnership. But I'd like to begin with my first question. So many of us have simply read the book summary, and we all have similar questions, I guess. So I wonder, Lena and Rebecca, how your research process unfolded in gathering first-hand accounts from women across 22 Arab states, and what challenges you face in compiling such a diverse range of voices. So floor now is yours, Lena and Rebecca.
Wonderful, thank you. Maybe I'll start and then I'll pass on to Rebecca, because the origins of this date back 8 years or so, maybe more, when I joined the Arab Institute for Women as executive director in 2015. Prior to that, as you said, I hadn't done much work in the Arab region. I am Palestinian Lebanese, but I'd been working mostly sub-Saharan Africa and other places, Afghanistan and so on. And when I left humanitarian aid in 2015 and moved into academia, I took up the position, as I said, of executive director of this regional academic and activist institute that this year is 50 years old. And I was inheriting this place that's extraordinary, with this long, rich history of working at the intersection of academia and activism across the Arab states, based in Lebanon, under the auspices of the Lebanese American University, which also has its origins as the first school for girls in the Ottoman Empire. So I was sitting on all of this amazing feminist history. And I thought, well, this is an extraordinary place. So with the task of amplifying the voices of young women, Arab activists, understanding their issues and how they mobilize, how they galvanize, and also sharing and celebrating the long story of activist work out of that institution in Lebanon and in the region, I started to meet with a lot of young women. And I was learning from them about their movements and how they prioritize and how they organize and how things look different from the very traditional sort of old school feminist organizing. And I thought, well, this is very interesting. And at the same time, we were post-Arab, so-called Arab Spring, talking about how those movements succeeded or not. Women, especially young women, were very much on the front lines and what that meant. And so for me, it started really as a personal curiosity that led to an intellectual exploration. And lucky for me, I had done lots of work with Rebecca. Let her tell you all about it. She is a survivor of having done another book with me. So we had worked together in the past, and I knew that no one knows the region better. She's traveled extensively. She's worked across the region. She has professional and personal contacts throughout the Arab states. And so I brought this up to her as a sort of, like I said, a curiosity. And that's what happens. You know, curiosities turn into books very quickly. In scary ways. And so that is what happened. And maybe I'll pass on to Rebecca to talk about how we did the research, because now it feels like 100 years ago and I cannot even remember.
I know, yeah. So we did this a year ago and it's coming out now and it feels like a fever dream. But I also think it's quite like how Lena and I worked together is quite indicative of how the project kind of came about as well, because so we never actually met. So we did the whole all our work and all the entire book without ever meeting. So I think utilizing the online space definitely helped us. And as Lena said, it had started with her in AIW and building on that and that curiosity. And then both of us being in and out of the region for a number of years. And, you know, really capitalizing on this curiosity, we said, okay, what do we want to know? What do we want to find out? What do we want to amplify? what do we want to investigate? And it then kind of snowballed from there. I actually then went to Lebanon to conduct on-site research, but then we did want to be, it kind of grew then. It grew. It started off with being AIW and the Institute, and then it grew to the whole region, because we know it's vast and diverse, and there's no way we can possibly capture all of this in one book, but we want to be at least representative. So we created a survey, and this actually really helped through online dissemination, and we did it both English and Arabic to kind of capture as many voices as we could. So the survey was there. We also conducted a lot of formal interviews using both our networks, and then word of mouth, emails, just outreach, talking to anyone and everyone we could, because we also know that our network is not exactly representative. You know, we do claim we are feminists straight up, like that's going to automatically be, you know, what people see and engage with. So we wanted to, you know, get out of academia, get into activists, get into NGOs, grassroots, politicians, anyone and everyone we wanted to hear from. So it was a combination of survey, interviews, but then given the region and its vast, you know, diversity and also different levels of context, there was a lot of states that had a lot of things online, a lot of desk research, a lot of, you know, readily available material. But then there's some states that just don't. And that highlighted there another problem, that there is this huge gap of capturing data, of recording, because a lot of movements happen that aren't recorded. So it's how do you overcome this? So it did highlight another problem as well, in terms of access, in terms of a digital divide within the region, in terms of what we could actually represent. So yeah, it was just bringing together all these voices in conversation about feminist movements, about like what's going on for you, kind of bringing, as we said, there's a conversation about it and where it's going to go. And yeah, I think we tried at least.
Wow, sounds like a huge work. But by the way, is it the first public event of the book?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's cool. It is good.
Yeah. So thanks for having us.
Okay, so moving on to my second question. So the book mentions the massive backlash against women's rights. Can you elaborate on specific examples or trends that illustrate this backlash? Lena or Rebecca?
Sure. Actually, one thing that we should say is, just to put this in the context of what's happening right now on two fronts,
Yes.
and then I'll get to answering your question. The first is obviously the context of Palestine. I think you know that needs to be mentioned, and that is really front and center on many of our minds. You know, mine and Rebecca's for sure. I'm sure yours as well, and what that means for peace, for justice, for feminist movements. You know, what has been the effects of this occupation and the current genocide. So, you know, we're all kind of working in our different ways towards that. You know, and I think that's something I'd love to have a conversation about at the end when we open up to questions, the idea of, you know, how people may be aligning their feminist movements and practice with what's happening, and how to end this crisis. So there's that. At the same time, we are on day 2, I believe, of the so-called 16 days of activism to end violence against women. So the 25th of November, which is the International Day to eliminate violence against women. You know, international days, I have issues with them a lot, but anyway, I'll keep my personal opinions for later. But yes, we are in day 2, so we are having lots of conversations about if, when, and how we're actually going to achieve full bodily autonomy and integrity, freedom of space and movement, and basically the right to live and breathe, which should have never been denied to us. But sure enough, here we are, you know, talking about ending violence against women again. So, you know, that's very much a part of it. Like, how do you build these movements in the context of constant violence and pushback? You know, and this leads me finally to answer your question, because what does the pushback look like? Well, it comes in terms of denial of rights and fundamental freedoms, religious pushback, even increased violence against women as a way to keep women in their place. And we see this, this isn't just the Arab region, right? We see this absolutely everywhere. This idea of, it's not one step forward, two steps, it's one step, 10 steps is how it feels a lot of the time in the push for rights. I'm sitting here right now speaking to you from New York, where, in this country, women have lost their reproductive rights and rights to decide about their bodies and lives. So we are facing it is a constant dance. It is a light switch depending on who is in power and how they feel, flicking the things on and off. It is fueled by toxic masculinity and patriarchy and resentment of women's access to all aspects of public space, political life, education, the economy. So we're in a phase where, we constantly have to prepare for that. And if we're always pushing back against the pushback, we end up really not going anywhere. We're just staying where we are, and staying where we are is not and never was good enough. So, just as a quick summary, maybe I'll pass to Rebecca. Otherwise, I'll keep talking. And you can throw back to me whenever.
You can again. Okay, Rebecca.
I'll just sit here with my coffee.
This is how we work. You're getting a good insight
because it's very rare to have a great working relationship. And we have met. I mean, now we've met.
Yeah, we
have met on a few occasions. We haven't met. I know this wasn't totally blind, but it's great to have this. I think this is really about international sort of feminist networking, that you kind of understand each other, share values, want to fuel each other and fuel the movement at the same time. I remember working with Rebecca, and she's in Ireland and I'm in New York, and the time difference was extraordinary. So I'd be sleeping, she'd be working, she'd be sleeping. Well, she doesn't sleep much, but when she sleeps, so it was just this extraordinary sort of synergy. Yes, it was fantastic. We're cooking up other things. We'll save that for later too.
Okay. But no, it's true, because when you share the same values and morals and principles, borders just don't exist. So, and I think that's also very true of this book. And like Lena was saying, like, understanding the obstacles is so important to know where you're going. So when you're talking about backlash, we kind of looked at it in two different ways, and taking concrete measurable numbers from international indices, of which the Arab region performs the worst, if not among the worst, in practically all of them. So I'm talking like, gender gaps, wage, political representation, economic empowerment, like so many indices, but also numbers don't tell the full story. So we also want to go beyond that and hear from people in their own words how it actually day to day affects them, because like indices are one thing, but the actual lived reality is another thing, and it's often much worse and not represented. And I think a very real example of the backlash to resistance movements, if that's the context we're talking about, is resistance and that moment after, in a transitional phase, after conflict or after even COVID or after any kind of event, there is that moment of hope and moment of opportunity that things could get better or even improve. And I think that's what a lot of people cling to, and like that's what you see, there could actually be like tangible change, especially when there's a very active feminist movement, when there's a very active like women present as agents of change on the front lines in every capacity. And when does that, such active participation, the aftermath, you would hope, would translate into tangible change. But what we see, and taking this long view that we took and examining the patterns and trends, women are very often sidelined, excluded. The aftermath sees them reverting back to traditional roles, which, in the lead up to it, they have just renegotiated public space. They have, it's a radical thing for a lot of people to be in this situation. And then you just see it kind of reverting, and then often the backlash is greater. And that tended to happen, COVID, it amplified existing inequalities, it amplified existing, it, increased actually, domestic violence increased. So many different things got worse and gets worse and tends to get worse. And it's kind of, how do you then continue to agitate for change, to continue to put yourself in this line of fire almost, because a lot of feminist movements themselves, just by being a feminist movement, gets targeted. So there's kind of targets, from the patriarchy, from many different aspects and angles. And we kind of talk about a lot of different front lines that women's face, and it's not just in traditional war or traditional conflict. It's the everyday. It's a constant battle. Like resisting or existing is the resistance almost.
Okay, thank you very much, Lina and Rebecca again. By the way, I think Aparna has shared the link where for the audience to where they can find the book. It can be found on Amazon, I think, and other stores, so you can find the links in the chat box. So another curiosity, another question from my side will be about the some insights and stories actually. So because the narrative emphasizes in the book the role of young feminists leading movements for change. So could you share stories or insights from the book that highlight the impact and strategies employed by these young feminists? Actually, if you want, I mean, you can read the kind of like a part of the book if you want at this point, or you can just share a kind of example or story. So feel free. Yeah. Again, Lina, or maybe Lina, you can start, and then Rebecca, you can continue. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, again, it started for me with informal conversations with young women who would come to my office and tell me what was going on. And I would say, well, what is important to you? What are the challenges you're facing? How can we, like a grandmother of the movement here, help you to achieve the goals that you want? Oops, have I lost you?
I need to.
I don't know if you all can still hear me.
Yeah, just a minute.
That was actually the point, because Lina and I, we actually debated what constitutes a young feminist. She's saying she's a grandma of the movement. She is not. We're like, what age is young?
I know, that's true. Actually, but yes, age is social construct. Yes, and it's a tool of the patriarchy, so we're defying that. But it's in a sense of like me really wanting to be of service. And I would say, they'd come to me and I would say, well, what's going on? Like, what's pissing you off, right? Like, what makes you mad is the stuff you care about. The stuff you care about is the stuff you can't accept. The stuff you can't accept is the stuff you want to change. How are you changing it? And how can I help you change it? Ultimately was the kind of conversations. So, I have all these, I have 100 anecdotes. But, I remember one group of young women coming to me saying, listen, we know we are feminists and we want to speak out for our rights and equality and justice and all of that. And we know exactly what the counters to that are going to be, what people will say to push us back and hold us down. We know, but how do we counter the counters? So I said, they said, what we want from you is like a cheat sheet or, bullet points or talking points, whatever it is, for how to counter the most common arguments that they hear against equality and rights for women. So, I thought that was really interesting. I mean, they were very clear about what they needed. They knew what they wanted to say. They just wanted to help be armed with the right kind of arguments. And what I love about them, what I noticed initially is the ways in which they organize that are informal, that are intersectional, that are organic. They're not, these young people, and there are men there too, who kind of emerge, as if they spring up like mushrooms, out onto the street, and they share each other's frustrations and they care for each other's issues. And so they see the interconnections that maybe the older generation didn't see. We kind of lived these this siloed existence and very, maybe traditional approaches to what equality looks like. Namely things like representation in politics and the economy, when for them it's so much more than that. It's about full freedom of expression of sexual orientations and gender identities. It is about the environment and climate change and how that impacts women, how that impacts young people. It's about genuine youth leadership, not the leaders of tomorrow, but actually, young people leading the charge for change right now on the ground and in schools and on the streets and in offices and in public office and all of those dynamics. So, you know, how they organized for me was fascinating. You want to take over, or should I keep Rebecca to take over?
All day.
No,
We just
up to you. Yeah.
it's like a ping pong thing.
Yeah, that's the learning from old generations or listening to the younger generations. I think we came across it. We went to a conference, and young people were speaking. They said, we want to be listened to, but we also need to understand kind of a reciprocal learning, like a mutual learning from the young, but also learning from the old, and kind of not having it as a one after the other, but as a together. And I think that was a really important nuance in this as well. Like, yes, center young people, yes, center their voices, but also what came before were building blocks to now. So we can't just write it off completely as, oh, it wasn't a success, but no, it was a building block, and it's gotten us where we are now. And how do we move forward on that, with that? And as Lena was saying, the informal organizing, there's a lot of creativity to the organizing, especially in contexts when perhaps it has to be underground, or you have to be extra careful, or you have to be safe. Like, a lot of people in this, their safety is very much a real, like, at risk. It's very real, the risk to a lot of people. And how they organize or get creative, a lot of them use art, music, fashion, you know, yes, political channels as well, but they really show that, like, activism exists everywhere. And Lena has a really, really strong statement of, like, start where you stand. And she's very big in this, like, in the small spaces you occupy, you can make a difference. And we call them micro-rebellions. Like, even in the small, everyday instances, you can still resist, activate, agitate, you know. And I think young people they have that in, like, and they're always looking for something to fight against, fight for. And so the online space is very interesting as well in this regard. And you know, cyber feminism has been touted as maybe the fourth wave of feminism, but the usage of this, yes, it brings great risks, and yes, safety is another factor here, and also questions of identity, because are you putting your picture up? Are you putting your real name up? And especially in a society where sometimes maybe you're not always publicly, you know, uncovered. So that's another element as well. But the organizing across boundaries, regionally, so we saw that you can actually get a community online across borders. You know, I mean, me and Lena go New York and Ireland, and we're still doing, you know, like, it's very possible, and it's a very effective tool in combating all these patriarchal structures, oppressive structures, and in spreading awareness. And even in the context of, I'm going to mention again in Palestine, the mobilization online has been huge. And I don't think people even think they're going to make any difference, but it really does. And we're seeing in real time using this online space and how effective it can be.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. By the way, Lena, you can go on, huh? If you want to say something, you can go on.
You know, I think I covered it all, but actually, you know, going back to one comment you made about, is this our first launch? You know, and I wanted to also specify why that is, you know, why that is the case. And it is because, you know, for Rebecca and I both, when we received the book, which has been marinating for 1 year with the publisher, you know, the book writing world is one of those funny things that you don't have a lot of control over. But, you know, when it was finally released, you know, it was in the context of this current crisis in Palestine. And so we felt like it was inappropriate. You know, we hardly posted it. We did not showcase and share it full as much as we would have liked. And I think, you know, that's been the sort of you know, way that we're at least trying to do something that is appropriate and expressing solidarity with this. So yeah, that's probably why, you know, this might be the first you hear of it, at least for now. But hopefully we think the lessons from the book, you know, and it doesn't give you answers, right? There are a lot of questions, but it opens up avenues for discussion. And I would imagine a dozen other books, because these are curiosities that that I think we all need to pay attention to. You know, this idea of what is happening with the next generation of feminist movements, where that is going to lead us, where the shortcomings have been in the past, and how we can help continue to fuel that fire. You know, I keep saying, I want to see this done in my lifetime. Like, I don't know how many kale shakes I have to drink to stay alive, but I am determined to see some major change in the time that I have on Earth. So I'm hoping that the next generation of feminists are the ones that can complete this job. No pressure, of course. But the book opens up avenues for that kind of discussion, for what it's going to concretely take to finish this job.
But by the way, we haven't talked about this and planned this, but if you want to read some part of the book, you can. If you have some favorite parts, or I don't know, favorite paragraphs, you can.
I mean, we've got lots of favorite quotes, but I don't have them in front of me. I mean, I think Rebecca, we did like a PowerPoint with the best quote. The nice thing about the book for me personally is that it was very, very hard. We're trying to do 22 states. We didn't reach all of them, obviously. We're trying to do, hundreds of people, lots of voices, all the diversity, really feel like this is something that that reaches as many as possible. You're never going to be perfect or fully representative. That's always the reality. Unless you speak to every single person, you're not going to, you won't be able to do it. But, it should provide a nice cross section. And what was so interesting for me was the voices and the conversations and the comments and the people who wanted to speak and who had so much to say. And we do have many of those quotes, but maybe Rebecca has Rebecca knows how to find things in a way that I don't.
One thing we asked every single person we talked to was, what's your hope for the future? Because we did want to look forward, and that was one thing we asked everyone. So it was kind of nice then looking back, seeing everyone's responses about their hopes, and I think we talk about this a lot, but in resistance, activism is propelled by hope, and it might not be a very real thing or quantifiable thing, but it's definitely a very real thing that propels activism. And you need hope. You have to have hope. You have to believe in it. You have to believe that something is worth fighting for, that something is actually going to happen, that change is going to happen. And it was very interesting also hearing from people at different stages, in different contexts, different countries, and what levels of hope they had or didn't have. And I think, for example, one woman in Yemen, a street artist in Yemen, she said, my hope is gone. They've taken my hope. Because the context there, she has no hope. And that was so heartbreaking to hear. But then you hear other people in other contexts saying, I don't have any hope, but is it hopeless? And no, it's not hopeless. There is always hope. Maybe at the minute I don't feel hopeful, but there is always hope, and you have to have hope. And then other people saying, I'm very hopeful for the future because of what Lena was saying, but the youth movements, the very active feminist movements in the region. And that was one thing, just the hope of it all. And another one then, I think we ended it was Karma actually, I think, said, you asked me, do I hope? I have to. I don't have any choice, but I have to have hope, and I have to keep doing this. I have to work on this, because otherwise why? What else? What is the purpose? And I think that thread, it was really strong for me anyway throughout this book, about the hope and the necessity of it, and the feminism that is fueled by necessity in this region, but also having the hope to continue it. So yeah, that was, I'll try to find out while Lena.
Yeah, perfect. One thing that I think really was sort of inspired and ignited by Rebecca was the need to bring creative forms of activism and expression into this story. The idea that organizing doesn't only look like petitions and protests, but that art is a form of activism, and it's just been so beautiful and rich to see in the region. And I know sorry?
Or music.
Yes, we tried to cover, we covered film and street art and music and and a couple of other different forms that were so rich, and including the cover of the book, which Rebecca, maybe you want to tell that story, how the cover of our book, I'll get the book, is
yes.
Yes, I'll hold it up so you can see what we're talking about, is also a piece of activist art. So we're very lucky to have that. But the idea that that people are acting and expressing themselves in so many different ways, from pushing back on the home front to art on the streets, paint and whatever, to songs and film, to protests, to whatever else, people are pushing back. And I think that's what's encouraging to see, and again, not to make everything about Palestine right now, but, in my head and heart, it very much is these days, the idea that when you see these kinds of peaceful protest movements, forms of nonviolent resistance that are emerging everywhere. Just yesterday in New York, people shut down one of the very frequently traveled bridges for a period of hours on a very busy day of the year. The Sunday after Thanksgiving, for those who understand American culture, is a super busy travel day. So, to do these things, to say, we need to be aware of what's going on. We need to pay attention. We will not be ignored. We will not use violence, but, we'll disseminate our messaging in a way that is effective. And people will listen, and people are starting to listen, and maybe this is the beginning of some real change. I mean, I, for one, am seeing protests and resistance in ways that I never imagined. So, as much as we are fighting pushback on so many fronts, on feminist front lines and other front lines, the fact that people are awake and alive and angry, I think for me is very encouraging. But let me get the book, and maybe if you want to talk about the cover story, that's kind of cool.
It's very interesting. It's very interesting that now we're seeing, in a way, Palestine is liberating so many. There's the book, yeah. Palestine is liberating so many movements and so many countries around. Like, we haven't seen street demonstrations like this since 2011, since the pro-democracy Arab Spring, and it's like there is power in presence. There's power in the people, and it just goes to show. So Aparna has just shared a blog. So we have a blog as well that people reach out to us, and sometimes, as I said, it's not safe for people to speak out on such topics, and we are very much advocates for hosting that space for people if they want to speak out. So there's one blog in the chat there. But yeah, so the book cover, it was actually a Yemeni street artist, Haifa Soubey, and she incredibly talented, but her main focus is women, war, the impact on the disproportionate impact on women in war. And Yemen obviously has an incredibly tough context. And it was actually, she had said, my hope is gone. And she also spoke about having art as a healer. And I think that's also a really important part of this that sometimes doesn't always get discussed. It's the healing element and the collective trauma, the collective tragedy, but also the collective healing and community that such avenues can bring. And she spoke about art bringing her personal healing, but then people who see it can also get that, and that community, that conversation, and even just seeing it represented in a way that's kind of in the everyday, in the mundane, and kind of you're just passing by on a street and you see really powerful pieces can do so much more than words, sometimes can do so much more than anything else. And yeah, she very kindly said that we could use this for the book because it does symbolize, the strength of a woman, and then also that's a feminist symbol, and it just brings it all together. And we saw it, we said, that's it, that's perfect. That speaks to so much that we want to showcase.
Actually, if I can say something about the blog, because the origins of that were also a part of a feminist platform. So the blog that you just have the link to right now, it's called Yalla Feminists. I started in 2015 when I joined the Institute, in part because I was starting to meet a lot of people, in my curiosities and explorations and conversations with young women who wanted to speak out but were unable to do so. So in some cases, their work did not allow them, or they were afraid of the repercussions, or they wanted to share some stories or issues, or they were afraid of any kind of pushback. And I think, that's part of the challenge also in the region, the idea that we're not yet entirely free to speak. And so I created this blog to say, all right, this is a place where you can submit whatever you want, under this umbrella, obviously, of equality and rights and feminism. And you can publish anonymously, and no one will ever know that it's you. And I will fully respect confidentiality. And so I, let people submit. And Rebecca's been managing it, sort of on and off for the last couple of years. The idea that we want to receive and share voices that aren't comfortable or aren't safe to express themselves under their own names. And I think that, again, in the case of Palestine is true now more than ever, with people losing jobs and opportunities, and putting themselves at risk for speaking out. So, all of that to say, it is important, at least for me, to be able to give people a platform to be able to use their voice. I keep saying everyone has a voice, but not everyone has a microphone. So if I've got that microphone, my job then is to share it. And I think that's one of the most important things, at least, that I personally can do. And we'd love to have, if anybody out there wants to say something, wants to submit, wants to speak, by all means, please do it. Please reach us. Please use it, because that is what it's for.
And not just like the region, feminist in general, also. Feminist movement globally. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. We decided to use the word Yalla. When I named it, in part because I was in the region, and also because, if there's one Arabic word that everybody knows or should know, it's that one. So if it needs defining for anybody out there, let me make sure we all have the same vocabulary. Yalla means come on, let's go, move it. It's a really sort of all-purpose word that we use all the time. So it is used in this case to galvanize feminist action. Yalla, feminists, let's get going, let's get moving. And I took that from a speech that I made in Sweden like years before that. So yeah, I keep throwing it around as a way to galvanize our own movements. And I hope it takes on. And with the blog, with the book, with the brand, I think absolutely it's there, and it's becoming a conversation tool for all of us. One thing, like, for instance, not to digress here, but one thing I remember being asked all the time in 2016, at least, was about Me Too in the Arab region, right? Me Too was taking off in the US and elsewhere. But people said, well, where's Me Too in the region? And I tried to explain, that we are at a stage, I think, in the region where we are speaking about these things, as we always have been, to each other. We are whispering Me Too to each other, but we are not entirely at a stage where we can post, a Me Too thing or anything like that under our own names and on our own platforms necessarily. And so that was also, part of the driver, that all because people don't see it, all because we don't tweet it, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So to honor that experience, and for people to be able to share those things without putting themselves at greater risk, because you're not going to do anything, whether it's, write an article or a tweet or a blog, whatever it is, if the costs of that, the risks of that outweigh the benefits. So it was just a way of making sure that that people's voices are acknowledged and shared and amplified, but they are safe and they are protected in doing so. So, Me Too is one great example of that.
Okay, thank you very much, Lina and Rebecca. By the way, languages are very funny, because in Turkish language, Yalla there is a different meaning.
What is
it's
it?
not like wait, you have Yalla. But Yalla means get out. Yalla, get out.
Well, yeah, it also, it could, it is anything that like pushes you in a direction. Like, in Lebanon, we spend a lot of time saying Yalla bye. Okay.
Yeah.
Yalla bye. So, I think that's,
I guess it just denotes movement.
Yes, exactly. Get out on the street, get whatever. I think it's great. We're gonna take it. We're gonna mold it any way that we want.
Okay, so you both mentioned, because I have questions about future and young feminist future projection, because you all both mentioned future projections also. So looking ahead to the next 10 years, 15 years, what are some key recommendations and proposed pathways to women's rights and gender equality in the Arab region, based on the perspectives and experiences shared in the book? So yeah, what are your proposed pathways or recommendations for the next generation young feminists for the next 10 years, 15 years, maybe 50 years if you want, so in a very long term. So yeah, Lina, maybe Rebecca, you can start. Yeah,
sure. The things I remember, it's been such a crazy time. It's hard to even remember. But one thing I do remember is, how to engage across different generations, how to do better with supporting each other, how to, we don't have, and this is, I definitely felt the effects of this, a culture of mentoring, of recognizing young leadership and being able to cultivate that, and knowing when to pass the mic, knowing when to give up your seat at the table. I think in the Arab region we have a history of people in power, including women, who, when they sit in their seats, prefer to decompose there rather than move on and share them and allow other people to take their place. So there's not a lot of a culture that I've found of opening doors for the next generation. I think that's one thing that needs to be taken into consideration. The other is the role of the diaspora. For me, as part of the diaspora as well, I feel like there is so much more that we can do to support, to amplify, to listen to the voices on the ground and be able to share those and better reflect their needs, and use whatever spaces and places we occupy wherever we live, as Arabs, Arab American, at least in my case, whatever, we're all over the place. I mean, if you look at just Lebanon alone, there are more Lebanese outside than in, there's more Palestinians outside than in, and that is true for a lot of countries. And there is a lot of power in the work that we're doing in and for other countries. So how are we using that to lobby with our with the governments in the countries that we occupy, to raise funds and channel them? What are we really doing as a diaspora to be able to build the region? There is too much a culture of a belief system that the only way that you can succeed as a young person is to leave. There's a lot of, and it's understandable, there's no blame or judgment on my part. I understand if you look at some countries and you think, well, there's no hope for me here, there's no future for me here. My best hope for a future and financial sustainability is to get out. And that is, that's the brain drain that is going to essentially undermine the region, draining it of all the young talent and potential, and leaving us with the old guard that is not going to be able to bring about the change that we need. So how do you create incentives for people to actually stay? How do you create the support structures for people to stay? I think that's another important aspect. How do you recognize the way that young movements organize that are not going to look like an NGO that is registered with the government, that is part of state feminist sort of infrastructure? How are we going to understand that this is now different? That everybody has leadership and power and the ability to exercise it, and we need to do more listening to that and sharing space. So those are some of the things that come to mind off the top of my head. But Rebecca, I'm sure I missed a lot.
Thank you, Lena. Yes, Rebecca.
A lot of collaborating, and recognizing also it's not just one voice, because it's a huge diverse region. It's not one voice, but it's a collective voice, and problems are different, contexts are different, but there are some commonalities that we can find. So are there collaborations nationally but also regionally, because it is going to be a long fight. It is a long fight. So how can we collaborate to kind of strengthen this movement at the grassroots, at the intersectional levels? How are we going to be strategic and organized? But I think two other things that really stuck out for me was education, but also education around feminism itself and those concepts, because sometimes it can be quite misunderstood or misrepresented, or not enough knowledge around it. So I think education around feminism could be a huge part of this. But also another thing that came up was, engaging masculinities and also redefining masculinities. And that's not unique to the region by any means, but engaging and redefining masculinities is huge if we want to overcome patriarchal systems and oppression. And this came up quite a lot, actually, especially with the younger generation. And the problems can only be overcome if we have allies, if we have everyone involved in this fight. And I think that was a really critical part, at least for me, when we were going through all of this. And there are a lot of good organizations in the region doing work on this. So it definitely is shifting. I mean, activism morphs throughout contexts and years anyway, and I think this is a big one that has a lot of room for potential. Also, faith communities are an untapped resource in this, especially if there's a huge movement for secularism, but then there's also a movement for finding rights within religious frameworks, and a lot of faith leaders are the community leaders. And how can we foster this dialogue, and how can we understand that I mean, religion cannot be divorced from context, but how can we understand that rights are like should be given, but like how do we get there based on different people's belief sets and community and, as I said, dialogue.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, both, for being here, for presenting your wonderful book. So this is actually the end of the chat. So I very quickly.
God, we talk a lot because that went quick.
No. We have like 5-10 minutes more for the questions and comments. Actually, we have one comment in the chat box, but first I need to turn on my camera for this, and I'm gonna share it with you. Maybe yes. From Nazifa. Hello, I'm very glad to joining the meeting and listening to Lina, who book on Afghanistan. I'm reading for my PhD research. I'm proposing if we can work in collaboration to arrange a similar session for Afghan women activists. Thank you. So there's a proposition for you, Lina. Or maybe Nazifa, are you here? Maybe you can unmute yourself.
My heart for Afghanistan is broken. My God. There's so much I want to say about Afghanistan, and and I wish that I could juggle as many things as my heart wants to juggle. I would love to have a conversation about Afghanistan. Absolutely. I probably need a few weeks, since I seem to have dropped everything in my life for Palestine at the moment. And it it's very hard, I think, when we are juggling so many tragedies, to keep focus on all of them. And so much has happened in Afghanistan and next door that I've been unable to kind of speak out on, as well as so many other countries that are in the middle of tragedy and crisis. So yes, I would love to kind of co-organize something and have it be something that is really sort of thinking, and strategic, and something that, where we can really come up with concrete ideas for what the future might look like for women and girls in the country, including, what the role of the diaspora is there. Very powerful Afghan women out of the country who are doing great things, who keep all focus on Afghanistan. I love that. I applaud it. And what the future under the Taliban is, Taliban 2.0 might look like, because it's, this is the reality that we now have. And how do we mitigate risk and minimize damage and maximize opportunities in whatever ways we're able to. So yes, that's an absolute yes.
Okay. Thank you, Lina. Do you have, I mean, for the audience, if you have any question, you can simply unmute yourself and ask your question. Nazifa, again, if you want, you can unmute yourself and like talk about your planned event. And also Lina, if you want, and Rebecca also, you can just type your email addresses in the chat box if you want. If people from the audience, if you want that the people from the audience reach out to you. So yeah, you can type your email addresses in the chat box. I'm just looking if there is any other question in the chat box. I think we don't have. Aparna, am I missing something, or are we okay?
Hello, can I just
No, you're fine.
yeah,
Or
sorry.
yeah, no, you're fine. Yeah, you can go ahead.
Right. Thank you so much for letting me into this meeting, and also organizing, Lina. That's very wonderful to seeing you. Actually, I was reading many literature for my PhD, and I came across your research or your book from LinkedIn, and then I downloaded from my library. I'm at the moment doing PhD on legal reform with regards to women's rights, and whatever I'm reading from your chapter, like, oh my God, it's so interesting in how much you have done, and yeah, it's wonderful book. And I was beside my research that I'm at the moment focusing, I'm also involved with some activism here in London with few organizations, but particularly with some like kind of coalitions and Afghan Women Forum, where I meet a lot of like women activists, particularly Afghans, and I thought so one of the things that we have set up called like a coalition of Afghan Women for Change. And we are planning to organize some events and conferences and some collaborations with other stakeholders. And I think having a separate session and talk in detail would be very beneficial. And particularly your experience, the way that you look at all this, liberal, reform in Afghanistan, and the way that you have brought this gender understanding from Afghan women's perception. So these are very interesting things to talk about it. I'll just stop here, and I look forward for any contact if we could exchange, and then perhaps we will take it from there. Thank you so much.
Yes, let's do it under the umbrella of SGP and have a sort of roundtable and a real conversation, something that where you bring all of your leaders in the network together and we can just strategize about what might be done in a way that's constructive and helpful, and then to make sure to write it up and share it. It doesn't have to be a book. I'm not as somebody who's written several books, I'm not convinced that books are necessarily the way to reach the biggest audience. Surely somebody is more social media savvy than me. Let's start to gather opinions and have conversations about how we can best be of service to Afghan women.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I look forward.
That would be great. I mean, internally at SGP, we can just a little bit talk about this and maybe bring together all the parties, Zifa, Lina, and other willing people to organize
Wonderful.
this. Yeah, great idea, Lina.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Sinem, you got muted.
Oops, sorry. Do we have anything? Aparna, am I missing something? Or I think that's right.
There was just one other question, but I think that was quite contextual, and the person isn't on the chat anymore.
All right, yeah, from Kristen.
Can I go
right?
and ask a question? Actually, I have one.
Sure.
Yeah, yes, please.
Oh, perfect. Let me here. Can you see me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Well, I'm Kit. Nice to meet you all. Thank you all for your wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed hearing about the book, and I can't wait to read it. I'm actually curious as to, in your research, what you found out about gender minorities and the LGBTQ community and how it all relates to the feminist activism inside the Middle East.
Great question. Yeah. I mean, am I on mute? I know I'm not. Okay. Okay. I think what is wonderful and encouraging about it is how linked it is to feminism and to feminist causes, and how much, everybody's taking on each other's issues in a way that are really inclusive and intersectional, as I said, recognizing though that the challenges are massive and there are very few pockets in the region that are safe-ish, free-ish. There are strong movements. We did speak to a bunch of activists and leaders of organizations about the struggles that they are facing and how they manage to juggle all of that, and the very strong and sometimes violent pushback against advancing this cause. And that's something that unfortunately is going to take a very long time, and a lot of people both inside and outside the region to be able to advance. But I think that, what is encouraging, like I said, for me, is that people are taking on all of these issues as part of their vision, their demand for a future that is free and equal. So it's there, it's on the agenda, but
yeah, it's there, and it definitely, the feminism movement definitely includes marginalized groups in all kind of capacities, because there's a lot of minorities, LGBT, disabled people, like so many different marginalized communities are under the umbrella of feminism, and they're, as Lina said, very active, if not always safe to be open, but we have connected with many who are, and this is where the diaspora can come in very strongly as well. but there's even one particular LGBT group, and they were working on language and even like expanding the language to be very inclusive. And I thought that was a really interesting one. And again, the activism is not just strictly on the street. So it's like very creative ways to do this and be inclusive. And yeah, it's a fact that like it's very dangerous in a lot of places, a lot of contexts to be LGBTQ plus, but very much is in the feminist movement. And as Nina said, a lot of people agitating with this on the agenda. Definitely.
That's true. I forgot about the language one. That's a great point. The idea that, you know, we are just learning the vocabulary for all things, you know,
Even
gender and exactly. I mean, that how that translates, there's not even any sort of agreed upon translation. So the idea that words matter, and the words too often have been derogatory, violent, you know, and discriminatory. And so how do we then change the vocabulary to change the mindset to help people understand, you know, how do we normalize diversities in all their forms? One group, I don't know if you mentioned, Rebecca, I definitely forgot to mention, is female migrant domestic workers. You know, when I was at the Institute, we did a lot of work with that. That is a whole other category across the region that is discriminated against and is, you know, and are victims in effect of a modern system of slavery. So, you know, how are we addressing all of these issues? You know, you cannot, and I think what we're learning that is so encouraging is that you cannot be out on the streets advocating for equality while you are abusing your housekeeper at home. You know, I think those disconnects that may have been okay or may have been ignored, you know, kind of politely ignored in the past, are no longer acceptable. You know, we are holding ourselves and each other to account on all of those things. Like you cannot, you know, we do not live, as we say, single issue lives. Like we cannot fix one problem while perpetuating 7 others. And so I think that's, you know, for me at least, very encouraging.
I think it's important to say as well, even if legislation does change, it doesn't necessarily guarantee implementation, enforcement. It doesn't guarantee anything if mindsets and culture and behaviors and beliefs do not also catch up with that. So that is also another challenge.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you again. So there are actually 2 questions from the audience. One is about whether you have any plans about translating the book into Arabic language. And the other question is about how you engage with disabled women while you wrote the book. Yeah, two quick questions.
Yeah, we did say, like, the book being in English, we wish it was different. We wish it could be in Arabic. We would love to translate to Arabic and fill that gap, because not enough is you know, done. And I think that is our own limitation as well, not being able to read Arabic, and we're very, you know, apologetic for that. And we did have to rely on a lot of translation. And we would love to translate it, essentially. Bottom line, we would love to translate it if we do get funding for that.
What did our publisher say? What does McFarlane say about that? They're not going to do it, obviously, nor would they know how
basically
to do it.
We'll have to come up with funding to do it.
There you go. You know, it always, and this is what I hate, you know, and then it all, like, it is unfair and unjust and inappropriate to deny people access, you know, especially in a region that is an Arabic speaking region. And yet here we are bound by the fact that, you know, there is no money to be able to do that. So, you know, that kind of thing should happen automatically. But yeah, I mean, then the trade-off is, you know, do you not do this work at all because you can't do it in the language in which, you know, is a representation of the region? No, I mean, I think better to do it, you know, imperfectly, and then aspire for some, you know, hope to do better, or try to achieve some, you know, secure some funding to be able to do the translation or whatever it is. I would love for that to happen.
And if that person knows anyone, please get in touch with us, because it is something we really want to do. So if you do know, yeah, please get in touch.
Exactly. And I do, you know, I think we'd have to think of the challenge between Rebecca and I is that neither of us would be able to verify what has been translated. So, I mean, there you go.
Rely on our network to do so.
We'd have to, exactly, like, we can't even verify the integrity, you know. But then I think that's true for all translated books. You know, people who have the benefit of having their books translated in 20 languages, you know, I assume do not read all 20 of them. So yes, that. But the second question about people living with disabilities, you know, this is, This is a tough one because I would say it's not as much as we would have liked, for sure. But we also took a look at both physical and mental. This region has one of the highest rates of depression for women. These are the invisible challenges, and healthcare for women already is below par and is neglected in many ways. And so certainly, the mental health crisis that we have, the PTSD that is not P, because there's no post, nothing. We're constantly in the throes of crisis.
Present.
You can never actually, yes, it is very much present. And that point was made over and over. I remember somebody said, you can't fight and grieve at the same time. And I think, if there's a line that really just impales me right now, especially, it is that the fact that we are constantly asked to mourn and to fight. And I think that is really difficult. And we don't even know the short or long-term ramifications of that. Yes. So all forms of disability, all forms of health needs, especially those that are invisible or that are otherwise sort of marginalized and stigmatized. In the region, there used to be, and I think globally this probably is true, this idea that there was something wrong with children who were born with some kind of disability, and they were not given access to education and healthcare, and really just shunned and treated like anomalies or unfortunate accidents. Really, there wasn't a lot of knowledge, there wasn't a lot of commitment to care and support for special needs and all of that. So I think that is changing. That is good, but that too is going to take a while for us to have the right kind of support and facilities. I imagine that people more often than not see that they need to go overseas over there, to access the kind of help they need when they're in those circumstances. And I wish that wasn't the case, but I think it's true.
Okay. Rebecca, any further comments from your side?
Lena covered it all. Lena covered it all there, yeah.
Okay, that's great. By the way, Kit is proposing something about covering translating costs. He proposes to launch a fundraising campaign for this.
There we go.
That's amazing. I mean, I think we need, how much, do we even know how, we can find out, there must be some guidance.
I think they do.
Maybe, yeah.
Right. Yeah, there must be some way to figure out how much and how to, then to get 3 people or 5 people to verify the integrity of the translation or whatever, and then how to reprint it. I think as the publisher, then can they even do it? We'd have to do some homework, but we would gladly take you up on that, because I think that was very much in our vision. It was a painful shortcoming for both of us. It's an absolute dream, and yes, thank you. And anybody who offers any help at all faces the risk of that help being accepted. So, we accept. So I keep saying, anyone who stands still too long in my midst is probably going to be recruited into something. So there you go, Kit. You're in for it.
Thank you, Kit. Okay, that's great. Actually, I can also maybe help you in terms of this Arabic translation. But yeah, I'll keep in touch with you, Lena and Rebecca. Yeah, that's great. Okay.
The other thing is, if we were to translate, also, if we are going to do a translated, edition, there would, I think, our part for Rebecca and I both, the parts that we put in on Palestine, we always felt like, it was just, we wanted to say more and do more and reach more. And, it was always this cloud hanging over us. I mean, for me, at least, it was very sort of painful. And especially now, the situation has evolved so dramatically since we submitted the book to the publisher. So now here we are with this book that, I would almost want to add, a page, a piece, something, a paragraph even saying, here's what's happened in the region since we wrote this. Because undeniably that has impacts, not just for the country itself or the region, but, as we're seeing globally. So I feel like that, we would be remiss if we didn't make that point.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Okay, so I think it is now the end of the event. Thank you very much for being here again,
for having us.
Lena and Rebecca. And thank you to the audience. And I wish we can, like be together in another event, maybe very soon. And keep up the good work. Yeah, let's keep in touch. Aparna, do you have any last words? Or
No, thank you, Sinem.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
Thank you.
Okay, so have a very nice evening, a very nice afternoon or morning, wherever you are. So yeah, see you soon. Thank you very much.
Yes, please reach us any way that you like, social media, whatever. And yes, let's continue the conversation. Thank you all.
That's great. Thank you, Lena.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.